Earlier in the week, protests broke out in Oyo State, southwest Nigeria, over high cost of living, food inflation, and the current economic hardship being experienced in the country. Also, similar protests were heard in some parts of the country, urging the government to do something to reduce the suffering of Nigerian masses. Despite the recent meeting by President Bola Tinubu with governors of the 36 states of the Federation on how to curb the increasing rate of food prices across Nigeria, most of the markets visited by our correspondents remain high. Arise correspondent Punarimam Benjamin reports.
There has been a surge on food prices across Nigeria, which has thrown a lot of Nigerians into untold hardship. In Plateau State, major markets within the Jos Bukuru metropolis have these food sellers lamenting the high cost of items in the market.
It's very, very tough. It's very, very tough. Things have changed.
The government should do the needful, because in most cases you discover the government saying A, they end up doing B.
Traders at Sabon Tasha Market in Kaduna lament the soaring prices of essential commodities like locally processed rice, beans, spaghetti, and grains. They report a 200% increase in prices, leading to reduced patronage.
The price of things are not getting cheaper in Kaduna here. The price of Kaduna is getting very higher, times 3 itself. Rice, before we sell rice before 1213. Now rice is 2,300. Gari, we sell Gari before 500. Now Gari is 1,000 naira.
Gari is here. Now one come by now. I get 6 children. See Gari 800. Where they buy 200 before. Plus the papa and mama. Not be 8 them be. How the thing can't go take favors now?
Residents of Maiduguri Monday Market attributes the hike in food prices to high inflation, government policies, and the inability of farmers to go back to their farms due to insecurity. They want the government to, as a matter of urgency, intervene and stabilize food prices in the country. Otherwise, the situation will grow from bad to worse.
Things have gone up. Something we used to buy for 20,000 naira. We now buy them for 40,000 naira. Only God can bring us out of this situation. We are in a very difficult situation. We are suffering. Only God can help us. Government should do its best.
A cross-section of traders and business owners in Anambra have been speaking on the soaring prices of essential commodities.
I don't really think it's going to come down. Sugar, for all intents and purposes, has actually gone up to 80,000 naira from 60, 65, 70,000. Now it's 82,000 naira now as we speak today.
Every day, people are crying. People are they are tired of business. If there's anything government will do for us, please, we appeal for them to help us.
Contrary to speculations that there is a reduction in the prices of food items like rice, maize, spaghetti, flour, beans, among others in Kano State, reports show that the prices of food items have rather increased, as confirmed by both sellers and buyers in major markets within the metropolis.
Honestly, that's not true. That's not true. Okay, last time I bought 3.5 liters of oil for 6,500 and today is 8,500. So how are things getting cheap in Kano?
The truth is the prices of food items have not gone down as it's been said. I used to buy a bag of local rice from Kura market. 100 kilograms is sold at a rate of 109,000 naira there, but we sell it here at the rate of 112,000 naira. A major is sold at 2,800. The prices keep increasing.
There is a call for the Nigerian government to march words with action to alleviate the sufferings of most Nigerians.
Joining us now on the morning show is Professor Utomi, a Nigerian professor of political economy and management expert. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Very good morning to you, Ruby.
Well, Prof, first let me ask you, how did we get here? If you look at the Naira is on a free fall. The economy is this way, that way. I mean, you are the expert. How do we save the Naira to start with? How do we save the economy? How did we get here?
Yeah, how we got here was very clear, was very simple. I could have told you, and I think I did tell you years ago that we will get here. So there's no surprise at all about where we are. I saw it coming. We just kept going the wrong way and just fastidiously pursued what will get us into the ditch. Anyway, that's not so much what we should be dealing with today as to what we can do to get out of where we are. I told you, Ruby, many, many years ago, I think, that the dirigist policies that were being pursued by the previous regime, the enthronement of, I would like to use that word. Anyway, let's use the positive instead of the negative part of it. The fact that merit became a joke in Nigeria. People who man positions did not man them out of competence. They man them out of nepotistic reasons for being there. Just made us continue to make the wrong choices. And anybody who knows about these things would know that we'll end up where we are. And then the response, when they tried to deal with it to correct, they didn't, they overplayed their hands because of other pressures on them, legitimacy type issues and all of that. But we are where we are. My first suggestion is that we stay from panicking. Because what happens in this kind of circumstance is that the panic, they throw all kinds of policies that won't work. And then you go into a downward spiral. You must calm down, look at the fundamentals. Why do we have these problems? Don't get rushed into a push from outside by people who don't feel the pressure, but don't get cornered into people who just react. Oh, no. Those outsiders don't know what they're talking about. This is not what you do. Just calmly look at what your national strategy should be and systematically implement. Now let's come down to food prices, which your report has just indicated. The reason that food prices are the way they are is significantly because we're not producing food. The farms have been abandoned by farmers who feel insecure. That's the critical reason. How do you deal with that? There's short term, there's medium term, and long term. Immediate short term, if you want to call it that, is to ensure that whatever they are, grain reserves, all of those, shore up supply, immediate supply. But immediately you begin to deal with that. Look, rain season has just started. The rains are pounding my roof as we speak. We must mobilize every kind of security force available. I'm glad that they have come to state policing finally. I think we should even cascade further down. Strengthen local militia, whatever they call them, vigilante or whatever. Assure farmers that they are safe. Move all this militia, even soldiers, into the farms. Protect the farms and say to them, the legumes, the things that will be harvested in 3 months, heat, produce. And that will be one immediate thing. And we have to deal with this like almost Operation Feed the Nation. It has both the symbolic power and the real effect of output. So let the country know that we are in the moral equivalence of a war. And let all hands literally get on deck in an organized manner, almost like an army on the march. And we will get food out. The example effect will lead to prices beginning to calm and all of that. Then we begin to implement the medium term and the longer term measures. Exchange rates. People are forcing over exchange rates. We go and borrow $1.3 billion today to shore up the naira. Meaningless. You will shore it up for 2-3 weeks, then it will take another dip. It's just like watching George Soros going after the ringgit Malaysia in 1997. And look at the way Mahathir responded to it, with calmness, with firm view of what they were doing and what they wanted to accomplish. That's what we must do now. We should not be panicking and rushing and borrowing 1.3 billion here, 3 billion there to shore up the naira. We should realize that the naira is tumbling because we have not been producing for years. It's been looking at us. Now we have the capacity again, like an army on the march, to really move into production. But we have to have a strategy. Take our factor endowments. Okay, this part of the country is strong here in terms of its endowment. That part of the country is strong there. And literally organize, I mean, again, let me keep using this metaphor of an army. Organize with, industry clusters for young people moving there, the incentives, and try and take on specific value chains. Use limited industrial policy. Clearly, I am not suggesting what some people are rushing into, return to import substitution type, general tariff protection. Those don't work. You will create permanent infant industries. You must take our latent comparative advantage on particular value chains and really aim to dominate those value chains, beginning from the education of people around there. My favorite example, and I'm sure you've heard this several times, if you move into the Niger, the North Central, sesame seeds growing in the wild, they're using the thing to make soup. Now, very deliberately, primary education in their curriculum, how do you improve the yield in sesame seed production? In just about every product, Nigeria's yield per hectare is a very small fraction of that of Egypt, of South Africa, of other African countries. What are the reasons why our output is so poor and so low? We intervene through massive education. Take young people, put them in apprenticeship, literal apprenticeship schemes with backups of entrepreneurship training. And we will see that in a few years, or you will see massive turnaround. I go back to use as example what happened to Nigeria between 1957 and 1960 with industrialization. Look, colonial Nigeria did not industrialize Nigeria at all. I mean, literally, there were, I think, only 2 factories or whatever by 1956 in Nigeria. But when self-government came, the new leaders realized that industrialization was very important. Before you knew it, we had all these farm settlements picking up everywhere, all aimed at industrial production. We had very fast investments in industrial estates, beginning with the Ikeja here, through Aba, Transamadi, Kakuri. Hey, go and read Irene's son and what she wrote about the textile industry in Kaduna and how it ascended with Hong Kong Chinese. In 1960, manufacturing output was 20% of GDP from out of nothing literally 4 years before. We can do that again. But those who provide leadership must eat a humble pie. Politicians must behave themselves. They have acted irresponsibly as far as the future of Nigeria is concerned. The politicians are the mess that Nigeria is suffering. Right. We've got to make them realize that. Get out of those funny Mercedes-Benzes and SUVs you are buying. By golly, go around in some small car. You don't deserve it. And let's use the resources of this country to ratchet up production and get the people of Nigeria able to feed themselves and make progress.
Thank you so much, Professor Utomi, for that. And just taking us through some of the things that ought to be done and must be done, and even going into education, catching them young, the curriculum, agriculture. I remember it used to be one of the compulsory subjects, but people have talked about the quality of the teaching and even the practical of it, and if that's still being upheld in today's school. But let's talk about, you said something really important. One of the first things to do when faced with this kind of crisis is don't panic, not to panic. However, some people might say that some of the reactions of this administration has been knee-jerk, just responding to try to fix the issues. So I'd like you to examine some of them, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. One of which, just an announcement that following a meeting by the Ministry of Finance and coordinating meeting, Minister of the Economy, there's a proposal to restart the direct cash transfer program, which is part of the efforts of this administration to alleviate, or at least to support the most vulnerable in terms of those who are living in poverty and perhaps being able to afford to buy this food that we're talking about. What's your take on this? Because the previous administration was criticized for the way in which they managed or handled the direct cash transfer. In some instances, it's said to be quite opaque. The process is not transparent. In other instances, it said it is necessary at this point because people are desperate and we need an immediate response in the initial sense before we begin to talk about more medium to long-term responses. What's your thoughts on this?
I totally and absolutely agree. The problem with the conditional cash transfers was how the Buhari administration administered it. I mean, I'm sure many of you heard the former Vice President Oshibajo repeatedly make the point in public speeches that I was responsible for that policy and that it was written in my house. I mean, he said it several times. Bossa Familia proved a remarkable tool that Inácio Lula da Silva used to turn things around in Brazil. I know it can work. It is the nepotism and the unseriousness of the previous administration that made it look as bad as it turned out. We can do it differently. If we learn from the Brazil experience, if we forget our nepotistic ways, look, we've got to a point where we should have no shame. Turn some kind of activity over to Deloitte and these kinds of people to run for us and ask that a system of governance be put in place to ensure they get to those you want to affect. The point of conditional cash transfers is the conditional. It's not just the cash. What they do, how what they do triggers further economic growth. This is what is so important about those conditional cash transfers. And I think they can effectively implement it if they don't get into these politics and sharing money and this minister, that minister. That's what ruined the system. It worked in Brazil. It can work here. So I agree with you. Is Kneejerk, or we enter it, we cancel it? No. Let's just be honest and work for our people and stand by our people and stand for our people. Politicians can't use every policy to want to make their bottom lines. And some people should shut up. Then I'm saying it again. Somebody should tell Godswill Akpabio to shut up. He should not talk anymore. If he doesn't know what to say, he should shut up. You know?
Okay, Prof, I can see you're really upset this morning, Prof. Prof, I mean, I totally subscribe to all the things you said, you know, as regards politicians. They are the big problem. But also Nigerians too are the problem, apart from politicians. I mean, I can stretch the conversation further for you. Michael Okpara oversaw massive development in the East. After the Civil War, when Dr. Michael Okpara got back home, he was a pauper. He was a poor man. He could have stolen billions. But Michael Okpara had nothing. And this was a man that oversaw the Eastern region's development. But he was poor because he was honest. So we see things like that, but you can't compare with a politician today. I would like to get your opinion on something. Yeah. Former President Yakubu Gowon was saying today that, oh, give the president time, and he was trying to liken it to his own time. And I tried to bring an exception that said, I disagree with former President Yakubu Gowon because when he ran the Civil War, he had a leadership and a steady head to run the economy like Obafemi Awolowo. That Nigeria went into a war and we didn't incur a lot of deficits. In fact, we're so bullish that Awolowo could bring us out of the sterling union after the war and created a new currency. So, what would you say as regards the economic management? Do we have resolute hands the like of them, Obafemi Awolowo, and how can we get them? Not hands that will say that the value of the naira is 700, the fair value, and today we are going to close to 2,000. And secondly, I also wanted to ask, you said we should not have a knee-jerk reaction. So should we leave the naira to continue to slide the way it is? Or we should, hold it where we can until we fix these fundamentals? Because I'm happy you talked about George Soros and how Mahathir traded him with the ringgit, but you also remember how Britain plunged about 14 billion in 1992 to be able to stem the tide of the destruction of their pound sterling. So nations too have to defend. In 1964, America and a couple of other countries had to give Britain about $3 billion to be able to stand the fall of the pound when they still had the gold standard. So at some point we have to defend this. We can't allow it fall like this. I want your take on those two things, sir.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You should just not allow it to free fall, but don't do it in a knee-jerk way of go and borrow 1.3 billion today, borrow 3 billion tomorrow. No, it has to be structured. Look, like or hate Jeff Sachs, important point he makes is the potential of the economies of Africa. Okay, if we take that potential and properly package them and use them to generate resources that can shore up the currency, that is a systematic process that is not knee-jerk. Let me give an example. India is one of my favorite illustrations in this matter. In 1991, India was technically bankrupt. Less than 3 weeks of its trading money in foreign reserves. India then got a placeholder, as I like to call him. Gandhi had been assassinated. You needed some person to hold the position till you decide which Gandhi would call next to drive the Congress Indira party. And this old man, Narasimha Rao, was shoved in as a placeholder. And Rao did the unthinkable, brought Manmohan Singh in as finance minister. A series of policies, first with the non-resident Indians and with reforms of the license Raj, sent a signal to the world that India was ready to begin to make progress. And before you knew it, India was using assets, its assets, placing them literally in a good register into international, into the international markets, and real resources were flowing in that supported. By 1994, India's foreign reserves were going up by more than $1 billion a week. So I think that there are resources all over us in Nigeria that we can systematically use to show up the naira without this rush and borrow to hold it, and the thing is leaking and rushing to the next leaking roof, and after a while you go into a state of surrender. No. If you take, as an illustration I've used, again, there's no point in crying over spilled milk. Many, many years ago, when I was writing on the subject of uncertainty and managing the Nigerian economy, I looked at NNPC, and this was in the early 90s. NNPC for me was clearly Nigeria's biggest problem. The lack of transparency, and all of that in the NNPC. I dared then to suggest that the NNPC should go into a strategy which, remarkably, NLNG would go off on a few short years after. I think most people are familiar with the remarks from an interview I had with the late Dr. Tom John, which appears in my book, Managing Uncertainty, in which I said to him, can we not privatize NNPC? Now, if we had done that at that time, when I say privatize, if we sold, 40%, 50% or whatever of NNPC, today, all we need to do is, if NNPC was in the London Stock Exchange, use just a portion of NNPC shares on the London Stock Exchange to bring in the revenues that will show up the naira. We would have no problem at all. I can argue that since there was enough good thinking, thanks to Don Etiebet, Isama PCR Siodo, and a couple of them that did some, let me call it finagling last minute, that made the NLNG go the direction that it finally went, thank God. Even today, even with gas not coming enough to NLNG to meet its obligations, we place the NLNG on the London and New York stock exchanges. We could take just a small percentage of it and generate the revenues that can show up the naira. I mean, these are things that we should be doing in a clear and systematic manner without knee-jerk panic reactions.
Prof, you've talked
and
about...
energy is not the only asset Nigeria has. It has a plethora of assets. I mean, just look at this wasting, what you call it, Federal Secretariat in Lagos. 20-something, 30-something years of silly litigation. What kind of nonsense is that? Get 2-3 judges. If you guys don't sort this thing out in 1 week, you're fired. And you get a judgment. And then you use the asset. And, you know, just draw from that alone investments of billions of dollars. And there are 1,000 of those that I can point you to. So it's just a matter of irresponsible management of the country. That's all that is our problem.
Well, Prof, 2 quick things from what you have said.
You're going to say something?
Yes. You had talked about nepotism. You had talked about the absence of meritocracy. Now, these are 2 issues that some critics of the Tinubu administration had also raised. Will you accuse the Tinubu administration of not paying enough attention to merit, of dropping the ball on the score of nepotism? That is one. The second thing, you talked about knee-jerk reactions. Are there certain policies, specific policies of this government that you will consider to be knee-jerk reactions that they need to rethink? For example, removal of subsidy, 2, harmonization of the foreign exchange regime, increase in customs duty to a 60%, and then this latest establishment of a joint task force going after currency speculators, including people in the crypto space, and so on and so forth.
Well, Ruby, I just wish we could focus on, some positives. There are many of those kinds of things that we can emphasize and go to. Look, we live in an age that is nicely called, Adrian Woolrich wrote a lovely book titled The Aristocracy of Talent, How Meritocracy Shaped the Modern World. We live in the age of merit. Clearly, governments of Nigeria in recent times have not focused on merit. That has been a tragedy for Nigeria. And my last book that I just published a few weeks ago focuses on that challenge with the public service. If you look at the public service that drove that 56-64 transformation and look at the quality of that public service, are you going to compare these fellows with Chief Simeon Adebo or Ali Akilu or Jerome Udoji and so on and so forth? The fact that we don't believe in merit anymore has been the tragedy of our country. And what is to stop us from having the best people do the best work and other people pick up from the benefits that come from it? But we just stall the whole country by having people who can manage anything in positions that they should not be in. So yes, there's clearly a problem of abandonment of a meritocracy in Nigerian public life. As for Kneejerk, you had a long list of them. You yourself have listed them as Kneejerk. I don't want to embellish what you have said. But the point is that we have the capacity to turn away from those kinds of choices and systematically look at how to solve problems. I've just given a few examples of how we can do that. I mean, my colleague and friend from many years, Ayo Teriba, has gone, is run out of sputum just talking about building a proper national asset register and what that can do for us. And I think that we need to turn to more systematic assessments of how to deal with problems with those kinds of approaches, rather than the current, see the loop. I like this illustration because I used it many years ago in looking at the transition under structural adjustment from diversified conglomerates. When they're patching one part of the roof is leaking, they run to the other part, the patching is leaking. By the time they run to the fourth, fifth, they retreat into what I call the state of corporate surrender. In many ways, we're trying to work ourselves into that if we are not careful. But if we are focused and, we hit the road with passion and commitment. And see, unfortunately, you would have to reach out and bring everybody to say our country is in national crisis. Let's forget political differences. Let's forget the fact that we don't have political parties, because we don't. Let's forget the fact that we don't have a democracy, because we don't. But let's just say we need to save our country. I think it was Rufai who mentioned General Gowon. I sympathize with comments made by General Gowon, who I admire greatly. The problem is that he's too much a Christian, and he focuses on forgive them more than he focuses on what really we should do. I spent a whole day with General Gowon in London when I was writing my PhD thesis around 1980. I think it was a Easter weekend. And we went through what happened in his administration. When I pressure him to write his memoirs, he says to me, you have all the information, why don't you write it? Look, what happened with the Gowon administration is something that I look at our politicians and they can't do, and I feel sad for them. This young man, as he was then, inheriting this national turmoil, recognizes a point that Mahathir makes when he borrows from Lyndon Baines Johnson. That it's better for everybody to be inside the house, pissing out, than for people to be outside the house, pissing in. And General Gowon more or less put together a government of national unity, bringing together all the leading politicians from their various different opposing groups and the talents that they brought with them, and found a public bureaucracy that was very sound, with their CODs, their EIDAs, their TAs, the lawsuits, and so on and so forth. And was able to blend them at a young age into a national salvation machine. We need to do that today. And General Gowon should be able to advise them to do what he did in 1966-67.
All right, sir. So talking about the free downward flow of the Naira, I'd like you to share your thoughts ahead of the, first NPC meeting under the CBN governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardozo, which will be taking place in the next few days. A number of people are anticipating the outcome of that meeting, obviously, as it would impact on, in terms of the direction with regards to monetary policy. Now, it has been said a number of times that where we are currently economically, monetary policy must work side by side with fiscal policy. And I'd like you to just share your thoughts, because it seems as though in some quarters it's been said that the silence is almost deafening from both CBN and the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy. Perhaps they're trying to get a house together before coming out to make announcements with regards to policy direction. But I'd like to get your thoughts. What are some of your expectations in terms of outcomes from that meeting?
Well, to be very honest with you, where we are right now, we shouldn't focus too much on monetary policy. We need to go beyond monetary policy. But of course, we must work monetary policy well. Yemi Cardozo is a friend of mine, and I know he's a very sober person. And by the way, people expecting him to talk every day is not correct. Look, central bank governors usually are seen and not heard. When Lee Pemberton was the governor of the Bank of England, there used to be a joke. He had very thick eyebrows. They say you have to watch his eyebrows to see how they're moving, to get an inkling of what's going on inside the Bank of England. Karl Otto Pohl, in the old days before the European Central Bank, as the Bundesbank chief, again, financial journalist from his background, understood the power of communication and monetary policy. And the Germans were coming from a history where inflation had done them so much damage in the Weimar Republic that inflation was not something that Germans would tolerate. And Karl Otto Pohl was very sensitive to that. I think we should allow Yemi Cardozo to stay away from public glare and soberly sit down with his friends. And I trust Yemi. Look, when he was planning commissioner in Lagos, a lot of work was done sitting in my office at the Lagos Business School, and we'll just be talking about what needed to be done. And I think that people should not pressure him into making statements every day. He's not a politician. He should not be making statements every day. Let Wale deal with that. Let there be a fiscal policy that is appropriate to the situation we have, but let there be broad, wide consulting. And let's ensure that what matters is not any interests, but the best interest of the Nigerian people. That's what really matters.
So, Prof, I'm taking at sea that today, in 2024, we're just talking about a national asset register. And it's very scary for our country that we have so much asset, we're just talking about it.
Scary, brother, scary.
When the likes of William the Conqueror, as at 1086, had something called the Doomsday Book, where all the assets in Britain were listed out. 1086. But 2024, I'm just talking asset. I mean, it's indicative of the kind of leadership that runs this country. The question I'd like to ask you now is, apart from the talk about knee-jerk reaction and everything, the major problem we are facing now is we're trying to go a little bit away or away completely from the Keynesian model we know, where we have a big government that puts its hand in spending, to a market-driven economy, which we have never known. Big government set up in the 70s, had a windfall, put that back in fuel subsidies, put that back in education subsidies. Almost every sector is subsidized. Big government. But we want to stop that overnight. And that's the ideological problem we're facing as we speak. And why we want to stop that is because we don't have that money any longer and corruption has frittered it out. How do we balance?
You know, Rufai, I sometimes think that what we're going through is a good thing for Nigeria. Because we need something to make us recalibrate. We have a total misconception of what economic growth is about because we have had this windfall that we use to create big government. And let's be clear how this happened to us. We had Fabian socialism at the base of how we started out. You recall that some of our finest, brightest civil servants returning from the UK went to LSE. What is the history of LSE? How did LSE come about? The new Fabians, I don't have the time on this program to go through the history of laissez-faire Britain and how a group of intellectuals wanted to stop what would have been the great crisis of Britain after the Industrial Revolution and decided to emulate the strategies of a Roman general, Quintus Fabius Maximus, and that's what, from his middle name, they got Fabian, and they were called the Fabians. The Fabians decided that to save Britain, they needed two critical things: an institution of knowledge, which was founded, the LSE, and a political party, the Labour Party. Now, in LSE, someone like Harold Lasky had such influence on the emerging young people coming through that training. And many of them were the people who became the base of our effective civil service in those early days. People like Chief Asiodo and others. And central to Lasky's thoughts, the idea of a mixed economy. The government has a critical role to play in many things. When oil money entered, those civil servants became even more convinced, and they went into this concept of government must occupy the commanding heights of the economy. This business of government occupying the commanding heights of the economy would bring us to a parastatal frenzy, as I call it. Any problem, set up a parastatal. I mean, if you look at how we try to industrialize, and that's why when I think of how we differed from, say, how South Korea traveled, you will see where it came from. But all that is history. The point is, where we are is not good for us. We need to recalibrate, and perhaps free fall was necessary to open everybody's eye. A government is useful, can help, but is not a source for producing our way out of poverty. What we need is a national strategy, and the one that I favor is one based on our latent comparative advantage, where we take our factor endowments, and every part of this country is endowed. You take that endowment, create production clusters around that area, develop value chains from there into global markets. Forget that we're going through now a process of deglobalization, but we'll come to that if we need to. Take value chains based on those endowments and essentially build up local capacity around those value chains and try and dominate those value chains. We cannot but rework how we produce in Nigeria. I know that in more recent times, the Chinese economist who served as vice president of the World Bank, Justin Lin, has pushed a similar perspective from out of structural economics. But I am convinced, I was saying it long before Justin Lin began to say it, that that's the way to travel. For example, I argued this about the motor industry where I worked many, many years ago. And one of the reasons that I said, look, this is not going anywhere. Don't try and do backward integration by starting from the fully built assembly and go if you're going to have competitiveness problems. Take endowments that you have relative to the automobile industry. One clear one is rubber. Can grow rubber massively across the southern belt of Nigeria. Take a couple of rubber components, become the lowest cost, highest quality producers of that in the world, and hit the supply chain of all the motor producing companies. 2 or 3 of those will earn you 100 times more money than crude oil earns you, will create more jobs than enclave economy of oil will ever create, and will save you from the troubles that come from the fact that terms of trade will always go against commodities, and that you are trading in manufactured goods. And now that we have an AFTA, now that we need to broaden intra-African trade, and this is really, Professor Benedict Oramah, president of the Afro-Exim Bank, is actually speaking this morning in Lagos at a Jidema Foundation lecture at Muson. And he's speaking to this subject of how we can trade our way out of poverty. And I think that we can take Okeo Ramah's thoughts, which I'm familiar with, and use it as part of our strategy to get out of the corner into which we are boxed in Nigeria.
Well, Prof, there's been a chorus of evangelism in recent times about how Nigerians should be patient with this administration. Even General Gowon, whom you spoke about, only yesterday is also asking Nigerians to be patient. Before him, Professor Wole Soyinka said, we must give the administration up to 1 year before we begin to, criticize the administration. And of course, a lot of government spokespersons, all of them are saying, try and be patient. Hope is on the way. Hope will come. Do you think that Nigerians are impatient?
Nigerians are too patient. That's the problem of Nigeria. Let me again go back to the Buhari government. In spite of whatever role that I played in the creation of the party and all of that, once he was sworn in, within weeks, he was traveling outside the country, he made a couple of dirigist statements, and I realized Nigeria was in serious, serious trouble. At the launching of the Ibadan School of Government and Public Policy, Tunji Olokpa's project, the press confronted me long before Buhari's cabinet. And I gave an analysis of how the Buhari government would likely end up. And it happened. So the problem is that Nigerians were so patient with Buhari that they allowed him to ruin the country. I think we must stop this patience business. Governments respond to stimuli from the environment, and it's not about being patient.
All right. So when it comes to patience or the lack of it, and some of the immediate plans, I know we started off the conversation this morning looking at how we got here, and then giving some of the solutions, especially a wider solution, including starting from education and the likes. But one of the things that has been said with regards to a sense of cushioning the effect of the removal of fuel subsidy, which was one of the first directions from this administration from the first day when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was sworn in, is this issue around the wage, living wage, minimum wage, welfare of workers in Nigeria. Now a committee has been set up. Right from the first day, they had said conversations that would be had, but at the moment, it still stands at 30,000 naira. Now, organized labor have said that in light of current inflation realities, it could very well go into 1 million naira at the end of the day. Now, since conversations are ongoing, the plight of the Nigerian worker, so that they do not die or they do not suffer even deeper with a high cost of living. What should we be looking at in terms of a minimum wage or perhaps an exploration of a living wage as has been proposed by this particular administration?
Well, my dear, I am not a magician who puts his hand into a bag and pulls out a number. I think that when you deal with wages, you need to deal with a basket of factors. And one of them is productivity. You know, when we teach entrepreneurs, we say to them, you know, sometimes you want to help your family members. It might be nicer for your business if you keep that family member at home, depending on their talent and disposition, and just give them some amount for doing nothing. Their coming to work might be doing damage that is actually preventing you from earning enough to pay those who work there and give them something. So, we've come down a path that is very ugly. I give you an example. When we began to talk about wages, how to pay better wages, I think the Obasanjo administration tried to deal with it in terms of, more productive or more revenue agencies, pay them better. And so you have a DMASA. And say, the revenue agency, they generate money, so pay them better. They begin to earn so much. Their attitudes don't change. They work as badly as they used to before. And because they earn so much better, all the powerful people send their children there. And so you have all these overpaid people who can't even pay their contractors in 6 months after a small 3 million naira project. So you ask yourself, what is the right wage? We must tie wages to productivity for it to make sense. There are many people in the public service that we need to take out of the public service. Don't throw them away because they are people, the citizens that need to be put to work for the good of the country. But many of them may have talent other than just showing up and doing nothing, as many of them do in the agencies they work for. Maybe they can be retrained to be teachers because we need teachers desperately and move to schools. There are many things we need to do other than just looking for a new number of how much to pay people. Yes, people should earn living wages, but they also should produce, by the way, living production. That's what Nigeria needs to deal with. There are many countries that I know of where one person deals with what 30 people deal with in the Nigerian civil service. How do you compare what to pay to this person relative to the other person? I think we should reflect on these matters. They really do matter.
Okay, so a couple of things. At first, it's going to be along the line of wage. Do you think, to start with, the civil service needs a big rejig? Because I'm looking at a world of AI in the Nigerian civil service, maybe not now, but in the next 15, 20 years. Are we even prepared for that rejig? Because since the time of the Simeon Adebos of this world, we've not had any big rejig in the civil service. Secondly, will be the conversation as regards restructuring a minimum wage. When we had the regional government, the Western region had the highest wage per region because almost all regions did not pay the same wage. Can we go back to those days where there's a marginal difference in wage, like Lagos pays a higher minimum wage, because Awolowo was the one paying the highest wage across the country then. The northern region was paying way lesser than that. And we had that and it worked in this country.
Yes. Sure. And this is why this whole federalist push is so important. Senator Femi Okuromu has been leading a movement I think we should pay attention to. And I think they have a meeting this Friday or so in Lagos. If we return to a proper federal structure, you will pay according to what you can afford and the production or the productivity of that place. The Western region had certain advantages from the price of cocoa in world markets and all of that. But you see, that forced creativity on those competing with them. And this is one of my favorite stories from that era. Western region, because of its earning, had free education. Zeke, in going to the East, decided he was going to match the West with free education. Tried to introduce this, sent a bill to Parliament on that. Jerome Udoji, Chief Udoji, who had just arrived as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance in Enugu, basically said East could not afford it. His team recommended that there should be fees for Primary 1 and Primary 5. That way you gauge the people's desire and commitment and match it, so to speak. Zeke saw Udoji's suggestion as a threat on his free education policy, spoke rudely about the work of Udoji and his team. And what does the Permanent Secretary do? He offers to resign. The colonial head of service, a British gentleman, pleased with Udoji to come down, take a leave, go to London, and kind of think things through before quitting. Udoji sails off on the MV Royal with his wife, who doesn't want him to actually also quit. Before he gets to London, John Holt has an appointment for him already. But pressures lead to his eventually not resigning. But guess what? It forced the East to rethink its strategy on education. And so they created a policy that enabled a combination of forces. The communities. The Igbo State Union became one of the biggest proprietors of schools, essentially to make up for the resources of the Eastern Region government to match the West in education. The missionaries had their part of this, and the philosophy came to be known as Ibuanye Danda. In Igbo adage, Bunu Bunu, Ibuanye Danda, to share the burden, to share the load. And Eastern Region was able to leapfrog in education. If we had those kinds of federalist orientation today, we would see an Akwa Ibom government make a choice to pay its people twice as much as Niger State government chooses to. Cost of living in Akwa Ibom will be different from in Niger State and all of that. So yes, it should be possible to return to those kinds of days. In fact, part of the problem started with the Udoji Commission. When the Udoji Commission reviewed the public service, it recommended a broad set of reforms, but people focused only on the salary increases and forgot the other reforms that Udoji recommended. And I think that's part of where the problem started.
And we had this report on the Labour Party, Julius Abure, and I said, well, after the 2019 election, you wrote the book, Why Not?, about state capture, criminal hijack of Nigerian politics. Then this morning, you made a comment that, look, democracy is failing, political parties we don't really have political parties. And I was going to ask you, does that include the Labour Party, the party that you supported in 2023?
Yes, it is a work in progress. It's being built up. And this is why I was very firm and one with Mr. Tinubu, who's the leader of the party, regarding some of the things going on in the party, that it should be a firm, clear probe to establish what is what. It must be just, must be clear, but there must be consequence. One of the biggest problems of Nigeria is consequence management. We don't do that well. And because of it, we leave a lot of drag in the point. A political party starts out as a base for a coagulation of thought, a worldview, a Weltanschauung, as Germans will call it, from which you derive ways of solving problems within a society. And so we must begin any real political party by establishing that worldview. I mean, people like to use the word ideology. I think it is too emotive and all that, so I don't like the word ideology. Once that is clear, you must then establish values. Anybody that comes to this organization must have these kinds of values, subscribe to them, and know that these are the basis. Then you have a strategy, national strategy, local government strategy, state strategy, whatever that flows out. And party planks are derived. And this then becomes the basis for engagement. I struggled to make this happen when the APC was being founded, as you mentioned in the book, Why Not? I tell a little bit of a story. It was clear that the people who I was in that boat with did not believe in the same thing. They didn't believe in a political party. What they wanted to found was a cult that provides you avenue to state capture. And I'm clear in my head that Nigeria will not get anywhere until it begins to have real political parties. And part of what I already started doing with others, and it was confused that people talked about merger and all kinds of things, was to see a basis of how to create this broad platform, establishing these things that I've talked about, with labor at the epicenter, but actually bringing in others, whether they are currently in APC, in PDP, but there are good men in all of these places, but many of them are too weak to establish themselves when they get overwhelmed. And that's what happened to APC. I mean, I didn't say because I was part of it and I saw Buhari going wrong within weeks that this is, oh well, this is our party, keep quiet. No, this isn't wrong. This is not a way our country should go. I said so day one. I began to distance myself from people who did those kinds of things. Nigeria first. Nigeria must come before any funny loyalties in these cults that we build up and call political parties. Transparency must be number one, and processes, systems must be open. I mean, can you imagine a ruling party coming up with 3 candidates in a state like Edo? And he just tells you that's not a political party.
Yes, sir.
And that's what's going on everywhere.
All right.
I mean, these guys are just founding cults to use to grab public resource. And Nigeria has to stop it. If we don't stop it, we're all dressed up with nowhere to go.
Well, thank you so very much, Professor Pat Utomi, for your insights this morning. It's been a very rich conversation, and we look forward to having you again on the morning.